Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about why I hate Chainsaw Man. Well, not entirely. I'm going to talk about why I hate Chainsaw Man and stories like it in order to get into the larger topic of how the popularity of this story in the West indicates a fundamental misunderstanding by people in the Western world about the traditional idea of hero as put forth by their own civilization. And I'm doing this, of course, because I like to look at different pop culture references and then apply them to those principles that heroism derive from in order to flush out my understanding of the topic and all its facets. But before I get there, I just want to thank everyone who left comments on my last video, leaving suggestions about who I should interview on these new interview-style videos that I'm going to start doing. And two, what you're looking at in the background is some of the beautiful art for my current graphic novel, The Valiant Heroes, mostly from my two artists, Renzo Rodriguez and Martin Stevenson. My graphic novel is now live on Indiegogo. The link for it is in the description and in the pinned comment. It is an 82-page spectacular of good old-fashioned epic storytelling and fun. Of the three main stories within this book, which, by the way, are all connected together by a subtle twist, there is The Valiant Heroes, #1, which is a continuation of the characters from my last graphic novel. There is also The Redemption of Kit Fox, which is a story that Renzo Rodriguez, my artist, really wanted to do. And the third story is The Rampaging Thor, which is one that I'm doing with Mike Gustovich, who is an old hand from Marvel and DC and worked on probably all the major Marvel and DC heroes you've ever heard of. And as usual, my graphic novel is my attempt to try to take all of these ideas about heroism and good storytelling that I'm always talking about and put them down on a page. So if any of that sounds appealing to you at all, you might want to click on that link in the description or in the pinned comment and go on over and see if my graphic novel is for you. And since I usually just talk and don't give a whole lot of visuals, you could go on over and check it out while you're listening to me. But back to my topic. And I'm not going to start off by talking about Chainsaw Man. I'm going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. As always, I'm going to lay some groundwork for the larger picture that I want to look at, which I'll wrap all together at the end with a nice little bow. First off, I'm just going to pre-answer all of the questions or really comments that I'm going to get in my comment section, saying things like, oh, this guy knows nothing about anime and manga, and or saying, he doesn't even talk about the anime, and then halfway through he just goes off the rails and talks about these weird things. Yeah, that's what the video is. It's my attempt to discuss a larger topic just by entering into it through this particular part of pop culture. Although, I'll have to say, you're absolutely right. I don't know anything about anime and manga. I certainly don't know anything about the Japanese culture which they are based upon. Very little, anyways. I'm going to give you my analysis of the story as a Westerner who understands Western ideas through those Western ideas. That's what I'm doing. So I'll admit right off the bat, I don't know Japanese culture well, but at the very least, I admit and understand the fact that I don't understand Japanese culture well. And the funny thing being to me is that I look at these comments I get on these anime and manga videos that I do, and while I don't understand a whole lot about Japanese culture, I certainly do understand a whole lot about Western culture, and in particular about argumentation. And I look at these poor attempts at argumentation, which contain a lot of things like ad hominem attacks. And I can see from these attempts at argumentation that most of these people don't understand their own culture well enough to make a coherent argument, sometimes even a coherent statement. How in the world do you expect me to believe that you have enough wherewithal then to understand a completely different culture, let alone the completely different cultural basis upon which their storytelling depends? But hey, if you want to fill up my comments with that kind of thing, go right ahead. The algorithm really doesn't care if it's positive or negative. Secondly, and I know I'm going to sound like nothing but an old fogey when I say this, I don't understand where people get this idea that anime and manga needs to be a niche thing, and that it was always a niche thing. I can tell you right now, growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, things like Akira or Robotech or Mai, they were just comic books, sitting on the shelf next to all the others. Sure, they were usually from some small comic company like Innovation, but they were just there. They were just comics. When I was a kid, I watched things like black and white reruns of Astro Boy, or Battle of the Planets, or the badly spliced together seasons of Voltron, or the Akira movie, or Ghost in the Shell. I had absolutely zero clue that they were supposed to be foreign things, let alone from Japan, and supposedly a niche thing. You gotta remember that back then we didn't have CGI, and so if you wanted to make a giant science fiction or fantasy movie, the only way that you could do it if you didn't have a giant pot of money was to make it in animation. That's why we have the animated movie version of The Hobbit, the animated movie version of The Lord of the Rings, or The Story of Fire and Ice. You went to the video store, those things were right next to Akira or Alita or Ghost in the Shell. They were just animation, which were just mixed in with the rest of the movies. It wasn't some niche thing. And I think where the confusion comes from is that people born, let's say, in the 90s or later, are looking back and seeing that, yeah, anime and manga were hard to come by at those points. Therefore, they're assuming it was a niche thing. No, the point was that back in that time, entertainment itself, especially for people who weren't either very young children or adults, everything within that category between those two age brackets was a niche thing. 98% of all entertainment was geared towards grown-ups, and stodgy old stuff at that. The rest of the 2% of the entertainment was geared towards little children. There was very little in between. So if you wonder why 80s kids were doing things like watching Arnold Schwarzenegger kneecap dozens of people at a time while blood spurts everywhere and going, how in the world would kids watch this? It's because we had nothing else. If you're wondering why they would take, let's say, the R-rated movie of Rambo and turn it into a kid's cartoon, it was because most everybody making entertainment didn't even acknowledge that there was anything in between those two age brackets. So everything that actually fell into that in-between category was a niche thing. Anime and manga were part of that entertainment, and that whole section of entertainment was niche, not just anime and manga. So if you found it, you glommed onto it because there was little else that you could find, and it was just part of that entertainment. Like I said, I didn't even have a clue that these things were from Japan until probably the late 90s. Why? Because they were always just there. And again, always just there in the tiny little pool of what I had access to. Or to put it another way, as kids, we weren't catered to. Our every whim wasn't, oh, let's get something for them. We were shoved off into the side and said, go find something to do. And you had to make do with what was there. The niche thing was not these forms of entertainment. The niche thing was being a kid. But anyway, I'll come back to the reason I ranted about that at the end of this video. So let's get into The Chainsaw Man, which is a book and a show, which is all I really see them as. And first off, I have to say, it was a mistake for me even watching and looking at this to begin with. I followed the advice of Perch, and I shouldn't have done so. I know Perch and I have diametrically opposed views on what is good entertainment, but I was scrolling through some of the things that I had access to. There it was. I said, Perch gave it a shot, I'll give it a shot. That was a mistake. So I'm going to have to explain the entire story of Chainsaw Man in order to tell you why I hate it. So, spoilers for the entire thing. And I'm going to do this chronologically and from memory. The story starts off with a kid. He's about 14 years old. His father has just died. He's left all alone in the world. His father owed the Yakuza a whole lot of money, and they came to the kid and said, now you owe us that money, and you owe us starting next week, and we don't care where you get the money from. You can go sell yourself in the street. If you don't get us that money or part of that money by next week, we're going to chop you up and sell your body parts. If you try to run, we're going to chop you up and sell your body parts. So the kid, not knowing what to do, falls down in a heap crying, and then he's confronted with a demon. Now, this is a cute little furry demon that looks like a dog but has a chainsaw sticking out of its head. Just go with it, it's anime. Now, I'll have to say, I don't entirely know what the original word in the Japanese they use for this is. It might be yokai, which is just a kind of a spirit, but A, the translation that they use is demon, and B, looking at it through Western eyes, they would all just be considered demons anyways. So it's just a demon, fluffy or not. And this demon is wounded and going to die, so the kid decides that he will sacrifice his life so this demon can live. And basically, in doing so, they join into this contract where, since the kid saves the demon's life, the demon now allows the kid to use him as a weapon so that he can go and kill other demons, which they can then take the body parts of those demons and give them to the Yakuza, and then they can sell those body parts and make money off of that. So, a few years passes, and this is what the kid is doing for the next, I think, 2 years or so. He's around 16 as far as I can tell. He lives in a shack, which is in the woods. He spends his day cutting trees and getting money from that in order to give to the Yakuza. That's still not enough to pay them back, so he's also selling unnecessary body parts in order to pay them back. And at the same time, they're using him as, well, basically what they say is their dog, which is their slave, in order for him to, again, go and attack other demons, to kill them and then get their body parts, so he's getting all of this money, and all of the money is going to the Yakuza. And they treat him like a slave. And he accepts the fact that he's being treated like a slave. He's basically starving all the time, and he accepts his fate that this is what the rest of his life is going to be. Soon he's probably going to starve to death or be killed by some demon, and that's just his life. He accepts that. Now, these Yakuza, they decide that they want more power, so they themselves make a pact with this very large demon, and that demon betrays them and turns them all into zombies, and then they attack the kid, and they pretty much kill him and his little demon dog. And when they're about to die, the protagonist and his little demon dog make a stronger contract with each other so that they basically become one being, so that the kid becomes pretty strong and he has chainsaws coming out of his hands and head. And so he goes and uses these weapons to defeat this large demon and then almost dies in the process. These other people show up who are from the government. They're government demon hunters, which, by the way, are led by this woman who is a demon. She finds the kid and says to him, "You're a demon. I'm from the government. I kill demons. I'm going to either have to kill you or you can become my slave." She says dog, and the Yakuza say dog, but really it's a slave. He's a slave. And she says, "It'll be okay. I treat my slaves well." And he accepts this offer. And the thing is, the reason why this demon woman does this is because she wants to make a contract with this kid. But she doesn't have any way to force him to do so because he's used to living like a slave, assuming that he's going to die in this condition fairly soon. He has absolutely nothing that she can hang over his head in order to force him to do so. So she starts giving him little things, all these pathetic little things that he wants out of life, like the fact that he can have a full belly, like the fact that he can have people around him that seem like his friends, like the fact that she offers him physical comfort when he wants it. And she does this in order to give him something so that she can then threaten to take those things away from him so that he will join in a contract with her as a human and a demon. Now, that's as far as I'm going to go into the story. And first off, I'll have to ask this question to anybody who is Japanese who is listening to my voice or lives in Japan. How in the world do they see this character in Japan? Because I'm looking at all these little things, which, as far as I know, don't make him very desirable as a protagonist. The fact that he shares blood with this other creature, the fact that he deals with the Yakuza, the fact that he is treated as a slave, that, in my mind, would put him in the very low caste system of untouchable, which, yes, still exists in Japan, as far as I know. How in the world would they see this character as being a hero or a protagonist that you should follow? Unless, of course, the idea is that the story is about you can't ever get out of this caste system, so if you're in that lower rung, you're always shunned, but he at the end somehow shuns it. I'm not entirely sure. If you can put that in the comments, that'd be great. But that's not really where I'm going with this. The point is, I'm not looking at this according to Japanese understanding or anything else. I'm looking at it through the eyes of people who like this series in the Western world. And they are calling him not just a protagonist, but a hero of the story. And I'll have to say, this character is not a hero in any way. And here's why. And here's where I get into the esoteric bits of what it is to be a hero according to Western definitions, which are based upon logic and reason and the understanding of reality. If you want reference to those points, go back to Aristotle's treatises on comedy and tragedy and how they branch off into his other works. So, as I'm always going on about, the traditional idea of a hero in the Western world is a paragon of virtue. Those virtues are very specific in number and order. They are preceded by right reason, which is to say, reason in accord with reality. That can lead you to prudence, which is correct decision-making. That's the first virtue. That can lead you to the other virtues, which start with justice, which is rendering to others what is their due, which can lead you to fortitude, which is the ability to stand up to all that the world can throw at you when they try to dissuade you from living out those virtues, which can lead you into temperance, which is basically a reordering of all of those virtues that you had prior in order to ensure that one does not outstrip the other. Because let's say you're pursuing justice and ignoring prudence in doing so, that justice becomes vengeance and is then a vice, not a virtue. If you pursue fortitude at the expense of justice, then that fortitude becomes foolhardiness and again becomes a vice instead of being a virtue. And since temperance sort of backs up onto right reason and reorders it first and then all the others, I always think of these 5 things in a circular order. That is to say, kind of like dominoes. You have right reason, that's the first domino, and then the next domino is prudence, and then you have justice and fortitude and temperance. And they're all around in a circle, these dominoes going around in a circle. But there's this little thing, this tiny little domino that exists in between temperance and right reason. And it is the ability to see and understand yourself well enough in order to perceive the world around you, because you're using you in order to perceive what is around you in reality, and you must understand yourself well enough to do that in order to get to right reason. It's a part of temperance, and there's something that destroys completely this ability to do so. Now, what is this thing? Well, it's basically the idea that you can possess or own another individual. And yes, I know that this part of virtue has developed and been expressed in very different ways over the millennia, and it's tied up with a lot of historical things. The idea of the difference between what a servant is and what a slave is. The idea that a lot of people throughout history didn't see them as enslaving other people because they didn't see slaves as people. All of these kinds of things are all tied up in that, and I don't have the time to go into that ball of wax. But the point being is that human beings, by their nature, are meant to be free. To express this in a modern American way, we possess, as human beings, the unalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You see, liberty is right there in the middle. It comes right after life. That is to say, by virtue of you just being a human being, you have the right to be free. And if you do not believe that, which is a self-evident thing just by understanding your own existence and reality, if you can't understand that, then that destroys all of the other virtues. And by the way, I'll have to say, this is an inherent evil, as they call it, which is to say, there is no circumstance, no matter how small, no matter what contingency that you can place upon it, that will make this into something good. You can't say, oh, they're not really people. You can't say, oh, I'm just possessing them for just a short amount of time. You can't say, oh, they're giving up their freedom to me, therefore it's okay. You can't say, oh, we're mutually possessing each other at the same time, therefore they cancel each other out. No matter what, there is no condition whereby this can be seen as true. You cannot possess another human being. If you believe, even in the smallest, tiniest way, that you can do so, you do not understand one of the most basic rights that is essentially part of who you are as a human being, and therefore that destroys your ability to use your own self to understand reality around you, which destroys right reason within you, which then knocks over prudence, which then knocks over justice, which then knocks over fortitude, which then knocks over the rest of temperance. And so, if you believe this thing, that you can possess any human being, or that any human being can be possessed in any circumstance whatsoever, it destroys all of your ability to have any of the virtues whatsoever. And if a hero is a paragon of virtue, and you believe this thing, you are not a hero. And what happens with this kid? He accepts the fact that he's a slave. And even though he's the one that's being enslaved, he believes this. He accepts this fact, and in accepting this fact, it destroys his ability to be virtuous, and therefore he is not a hero. And here's where people would say, well, he's just a kid. He's only 14 to 16 years old. You can't expect him to know all these things. Yeah, I can. Number one, believe it or not, 14 to 16 is past the age of reason. He has reason enough for him to figure this out. Number two, Western civilization says, you see, other people can mitigate some of the evil things that you do. If you do bad things, there can be some mitigating circumstances that say not all of the blame goes on you because you are controlled by these other people or forced into doing so. But that doesn't mean all of the blame goes on those other people. You still share in the initial blame. It is still your fault. And again, this goes back to, as I'm always talking about, that definition of will that we have used since the 4th century AD. That yeah, at the end of the day, it's not these larger forces controlling you. At the end of the day, it's you and your will, and you choose where to go. You choose what to do. And if you accept this, it is your choice. It is your fault. Now, the punishment for that fault, again, may be mitigated by the fact that you were possibly forced into doing so, but it's still your fault. And again, it's your fault because you have within you the ability to understand human existence and how it's supposed to actually work by nature of just being a human being. You don't have to be some giant intellectual to understand these concepts. You understand them simply through living life. And so you have the tools to do this. And apart from that, I'll just put it in a more colloquial kind of way. When that kid was given the chance to run, and by the way, he lives by himself in a shack, therefore he could run at any time that he wants. Even though the Yakuza would probably hunt him down and kill him, he has very little chance of surviving. Yeah, kid, take that chance. That would make you a hero in some small way. Take that chance. Not taking that chance, that's on you. Not running, that's your choice. I'm sure we all have different ways of expressing this, but I'll put it in the New England speak kind of way from my upbringing. Live free or die, kid. It's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. And the fact that you can't see that, or that you have accepted a fate whereby you could run at any point and probably be killed, but you understand that you're going to be killed anyways by either starving to death or some demon is going to kill you because what they're forcing you to do. How is that even a choice that you need to think about? And the fact that a lot of people reading this, watching this, can't understand those simple points, can't understand the point that this kid is not a hero, because we all have the ability to understand this simple point because it's based upon, as I said, your ability to understand who you are as a human being, which you have the tools within you to understand because it's self-evident. And by the way, yes, I do understand what the term self-evident means and how it exists logically. I'm just saying that the capacity to do so for all those things to become self-evident is within you. Anyway, the fact that people can't understand this simple thing about being a hero is expressed in the second part of why I hate this story. And in order to tell you that, I'll tell you something a little bit about me. I had this mentor at one time who gave me many pieces of sage advice. And at one point, one of the most sage things he ever told me, well, it wasn't just me, he was talking to, well, the entire class. He said, beware of people who want to study evil. If you find someone who wants to study evil, get away from them as quickly as possible. Why? Because that's what evil wants. Evil wants you to study it. Evil wants you to become comfortable with its existence right in front of you, right next to you, right in your life. It wants you to be habituated, that is to say, to ingrain in you that habit of viciousness, of vice, of evil being right there in your life. And if you study what evil is, and you put it there right next to you, and look deeply into it time and time again, you are putting yourself into the habit of desensitizing yourself to it. He continued on and said, if you really want to understand what evil is, let's say because you want to combat evil, the way that you do that is by studying good. Because if you study good and understand wholeheartedly what good is, you will be able to see good wherever it is. And when you have the ability to do that, evil will stick out like a sore thumb, and you'll know exactly what it's up to. Now, his statement was a little bit anthropomorphic, certainly, with the Western understanding of what evil is, which I'll give you right now. Here's the thing with the Western understanding of good and evil. It's that good is a thing. It exists in reality as an objective thing, and you could think of it as the Christian God, or as the Aristotelian prime mover, or as the Platonic good. It doesn't matter. It exists in all of those ways as the same thing, an objective thing that exists. But evil is not an objective thing that exists. It's not a thing in itself at all. Evil is a state, according to Western civilization. And what state is that? It's the state of turning your back on and or moving away from what is good. And the point being that What is this movement either towards or away from the good? How do you do that? Well, you move towards the good through the habit of virtue. You move away from the good through the habit of vice. And here's the thing about stories like Chainsaw Man, because this is not the only story, certainly not the only story that I've come across with this pattern. It is a continual journey with despicable human beings who hold despicable ideas and do despicable things. And somebody might say in the comments, well, you never got to the end and they flip the script right at the end so that the character does this or that and then becomes a hero. I don't care, because the whole point is that if you spend 20 or 50 or 100 chapters with despicable people doing despicable things and then say, oh no, I flipped the whole thing, so at the end it means something entirely different, you're wrong. It doesn't work that way. Why? Because those 20, 50, 100 chapters have habituated you to journey with these despicable people, accepting that despicable, vicious, and vile companionship of these people in your life that you actively seek out. And reading 10, 20, 50, 100 chapters like this, doesn't matter what happens at the end, doesn't matter if they flip the script, it's the same thing as studying evil. It's the same thing as making yourself habitually accustomed to the fact that evil is there, that you're becoming okay with it being there within your life, that you'll journey with it, which again, is the exact thing that evil wants you to do. So what am I saying? Am I saying that these stories shouldn't exist to begin with? Am I saying we should get rid of these stories? No, I'm saying that in a sane and rational world, these stories would die on the shelf. But apparently, we don't live in a sane and rational world, not even close to it. The fact that this story appears to be widely accepted and popular just goes to show how many people, especially young people, don't have the capacity to even use the elements that are essentially within their own being to understand their own existence. And why? Well, I would say, going back to what I talked about at the first, when I was rambling on about anime and manga. It used to be that being a kid, somewhere between a little child and an adult, that was the niche thing. Why? Because it only happens for a very short amount of time as compared to the length of time that you're actually an adult. Therefore, every whim of a kid was not catered to, and you learned to deal with the world as it came at you. And by the way, I did run across a study about this, probably about 20 years ago. I really don't know where it would be. It was studying the upbringing of North American children and comparing that with the upbringing of children in not-so-wealthy parts of the world, and it appeared that those children in the not-so-wealthy parts of the world seemed to grow up a whole lot faster than kids in North America, and not only that, but had a much broader skill set of what they could do. Why? Because they had to conform themselves to the world, to reality, whereas what do we have today? We have waiting on kids hand and foot so that it appears to them as they start to grow up, or should be growing up, that the world is going to revolve around them and meet their needs no matter what it is. To bring in another example, I used to watch those horrible WB shows, at the very least to give them a chance when they first started, and there was one show where they had this girl, and she kept on doing stupid things, and she would pay the price for it. It would backfire on her. At the very least, they showed that much, but the point being that the show wanted you to feel sympathy for this girl. And the first time, yeah, sort of, had some sympathy for the girl, but when she did the same thing the next time, I was like, you should have learned the first time. You really don't have a lot of sympathy for me. But that's the way the show continued to go, putting her in different situations where she made the same bad mistakes over and over again. And after it happens 2 or 3 times, I got no sympathy for you whatsoever. And that's the point of what we see around us today. You should have no sympathy for these people at all. They have had the chance, multiple chances, to actually come out of this stupor that they have placed themselves in. The instructor of pain has been inserted into their lives to try and rectify the situation of how they think and how they live. And yet, they do not listen. And that's really where I'm going with all of this. Choose your traveling companions wisely. If you are going to choose over and over again to journey along the path of life with these vile, despicable, not just people, but characters right there next to you, making it part of your life, habituating yourself to the fact that that vile thing is there. If that's what you choose to do, then that instructor of pain is headed your way. That's what happens when you make vice your habit. Because whether you believe it or not, that's exactly what we are. We are habitual creatures. And I really don't understand how in the world people could do that. Especially when they have something deep within themselves that is their own nature screaming at them, trying to tell them that you can be something better. That the way that you're supposed to go is in the opposite direction, to make your habit that of virtue. And in so doing, gives you the ability, even in your normal everyday life, to be heroic. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this, and don't forget, the link is in the description for my new graphic novel, The Valiant Heroes. They are stories about combating evil within, about seeking redemption, and about being heroic. And if any of that sounds appealing to you at all, you might want to click on that link in the description or in the pinned comment and go on over and see if my graphic novel is for you. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.